All right, you guys are able to hear me okay? Jerry, Lee,
Yes, I'm
Yep.
able to hear you fine.
able to hear you? Okay, great.
All good.
All right. Hopefully others are able to hear now. I think there was somebody there. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, hello, everybody. Greg Busick here. I've got Jerry Sheldon and Lee Holman that are going to join for questions today. Rapid fire day of content for you. We tried to put a lot into this up front on kind of update on COVID. We realized that you probably have, of the audience, we've, like I said, 600 plus people, probably a half to 2/3 of you are here for the update and our forecast related to COVID-19 stuff. The other part is related to the frictionless. So we're going to try to divide it in half as I go along. I have a lot of slides up front before I get to the frictionless portion of things. So want to move forward. Just a warning. First of all, let me just start and say, first of all, hope everybody's healthy and safe out there, and you guys are doing well. In all this is a mess that we're all dealing with, and I certainly miss seeing everybody and being with everybody there. Second, I caution you, unfortunately, I may offend almost everybody today, and to make a point of getting to the nature of the data that's being shared with you on all the news, on all this stuff, and how to sort through it, and how great people can have different perspectives. And we shouldn't lose friendships, etc., over this, just like it happens all too often with political things. That there is a very different view on the data, depending on where you live, how impacted you have been, etc. And we're going to go through that and hopefully help show some different perspectives and help challenge you to, through your news sources, how to get through things. And with that, we'll get started. Thanks so much to our sponsors, GK Software and Intel, who have sponsored the frictionless research here. We're so thankful for you guys and being able to support that and what we're doing. Second, you'll get the chance to answer or ask questions later in the little portal. You've got an opportunity to ask questions. We ask you to do that. Go ahead and do that at any time. But get that done and we'll answer those questions. The number one question we get is, can you get the slides and the recordings? Yes, those will be available on our homepage, and I will email them to everybody later today. If you're blocked from our mass email for some reason, you won't get that email, but they will be available at our website, ihlservices.com, tomorrow. So with that, games people play with data. You guys are, I don't know how you keep up with it when you have other things to do other than look at all the data and look at all the headlines that are coming through with things. So I wanted to start off and just say, hey, whenever you see a headline or you see a data, you have to ask questions. First question is just how to sort through it to get to your truth for that data point. What does this number mean as how they're being promoted? What does the opposite of that headline mean? And we'll talk about that. If you can get a look at it, look at the sample and the demographics that are behind the study. Ask yourself, is there an agenda from either the data study originator or from the publishing source or the person that's generating the headlines? Is there a political bent one way or the other from that source? CNN looks at the world completely different than Fox News. We obviously know that. On those different ends, you have to look at that as a source because the data can be looked at completely differently based on the same data points as they're presented there. Does the source or anybody, do they lean one way or the other politically, as we mentioned? Always read past the headline and the first paragraph. And I'm going to show you some examples from CNBC here that come into play. And then finally, follow the money. Who's making the money off of the data or the headline? Understand that in a click world, a click-based news world or an eyeballs world, a negative headline is worth 10 times the number of clicks as a positive headline. and the more sensational is another multiplier as a part of that. So you got to keep that in mind. I know I used an example before related to me winning a gold medal and how ridiculous that headline was. Well, it was true, but you had to get through the news story to get to the truth of that there. So let me just give you an example of a news source that I love, which is CNBC. I like CNBC. But if you go through this data, walk through those questions related to each one of these headlines, you can come to some very different conclusions. So at 12:45, India's total cases for COVID-19 are up to 50,000 people. What does that mean? That means that in total, they've had 52,952 cases. They've had 1,783 people tragically die from that. That means 1.1955 billion people do not have COVID in India, but we don't present it that way. The next story here, China gets the highest score in survey asking citizens to rate the government response to outbreak. Well, next headline, China's exports unexpectedly rose in April. Why would that be unexpected? They were shut down from February to March. Why would that be unexpected that their things would rise? Bank of England says UK economy would shrink by 14%. Okay, what does that mean? So you have to dig deeper. Russia reports 11,231 more infections. Once again, that is the most sensational headline that can come up there. So when it comes to decisions on when to reopen, your perspective is completely based on where you live, your news sources, and your political bent. And understanding good people can have different views based on that, all those pieces there. The greatest mistake you can make is to vilify an opposite view of your own because you only see one piece of the data and not the entire piece of the data. And unfortunately, it's not just the Russians or Facebook that are culpable in feeding all this stuff. It's any news organization that is made, they make their money based on the headlines related there and the number of clicks. And this is all, once again, a setup to show you some pretty sensational retail data that I'm going to show that if you look at it from the headline grabbing nature that we have today, it's going to look one way. If you look at it in a broad base, it's going to look other. So let's look at the COVID data here for some perspective here. So what you have here is I've got several states, several large states where we've had breakouts. And generally the headlines and the things that are getting pushed today and promoted today, the number of cases, the number of deaths, etc. Now, let's look at it a little bit more. Johns Hopkins started to put out hospitalizations this week. So there's been 70,539 hospitalizations as of this morning in the state of New York there. Okay, I've got some pretty strong numbers, 323,000 cases that we know is really low because of testing. We've got deaths, 25,000 deaths. If that's the only data we get, that is pointing us in one direction. I'm going to challenge you to take it one step further. And to do that, I'm going to share additional data that goes with that. So in the state of New York, 1 in every 60 people has had a confirmed case of COVID-19. In the state of Texas, it's 1 in every 856 people. However, we've got the number of hospitalizations there, but they don't tell you what are your chances of not being hospitalized. In the state of New York, your chances of not being hospitalized by COVID-19 across the entire state, entire population, you are 99.639% chance of not being hospitalized. When you look at it from a deaths perspective, the chances of not dying due to COVID-19, 99.869% in the greatest breakout area of the United States. There, if you look down to the state of Texas, the state of Tennessee, 99.997% chance of not dying due to COVID-19. If you were to take those numbers and limit them to the working age, it's an extremely low number, even higher percentage chance of not dying there. So in the state of Texas, you're the deaths excuse me, the number of deaths that New York has per population is 41 times higher than the death rate in Texas. So when you look at the data that way, it becomes, you can see a different perspective on why people are pushing back and moving towards the reopening faster than we may do at the coast here, and kind of the economic aspects of things. Next, want to talk about the justification for the lockdown. It was all promoted that when we lock down, we don't want to overrun our hospitals. We can't do that. And I don't know if overrun spelled right here, but the effective R rate, the effective of reproductive rate of the virus. When we locked everything down, these were the rates of each state. Texas was at 1.35. They're now at 0.77, which means each person who's infected infects less than one person moving forward, which means overall things are shrinking related to that. You also see why California, which was 1.34, the highest of all to begin with, is 0.83 now. And it's one of the reasons why you see an area like Bakersfield saying, why are we still closed? Or Orange County, why are we still closed here when our actual rate of things going down? Because what's getting pitched again is the number of cases and how we can sensationalize that. When you look at the data and you go lower than just the headline there, you start to get more of the truth and you start to see some of those things and look at it differently. So how does that apply to our world and what we do? So I'm just going to share some data from CNBC study that they did with SurveyMonkey. I'm not going to pick this apart, but just shows, how likely is your business going to be upset due to things. Food service, so our restaurant, 86%, retail trade, 72% here. In terms of business closure rate, this is the same data that we presented from Wampley. This is very small. You'll see we had this huge impact of up to 102% in March, where everybody started to go to their local stores. That is now moderated quite a bit down for the smaller stores. Retail services are starting to pick up. This is as of May 2nd. And I'm not quite sure what the spike is that's happening in travel and tourism in this data, but you'll notice it's always at the first of the month that there's a spike way above things there. So you can see the areas. And then when it comes to business closures, these are people that they're tracking that haven't had a transaction, have not had a credit card transaction by segment. So you can look at the big issues that are there. Particularly, this is small businesses, particularly for small businesses, and the impact of the lockdown. So what do we have right now? We've got a lockdown and we've got a stimulus, plus the stimulus mess that we've got equals big trouble. So we've had these stimulus problems where the PPP was designed to keep people on payroll. However, the banks were incentivized. So the PPP was designed for the smallest of companies, but the banks were incentivized on the loans of 5% of the loan value. So the larger the loan, the more money they made. That's a problem. That's why Shake Shack and all these others got these loans first and had faced with giving those back. At the same time, we expanded unemployment benefits and we gave an extra $15 an hour for a 40-hour worker for up to 4 months. That put these people at opposite sides. So depending on the state and how generous your state is for unemployment, normally unemployed workers can now make up to $30 an hour by not working. That is a problem when it comes time to getting workers back. This is going to be a transition of all this data and how you look at this data, really to preface you as to some big numbers that I'm going to share with you that are considerably higher than any numbers that any other analyst firm has shared with you in terms of store closures for 2020. And I want to preface this with the fact that these numbers are huge because it's a much broader look at retail and hospitality than what other analysts are sharing with you. Where most of the other analysts are looking at public retailers or larger retailers, we look at the entire spectrum of retailers from mom and pop all the way up. And so this is where things are so devastating. based on what's happened in the last several weeks, the mix up with the PPP, with the incentive plans, the lockdowns being longer in different states, we are now projecting in the United States a loss of nearly 300,000 stores. And the reason I went through all of that stuff beforehand is to preface you that you've got a big number. This is 300,000 stores, but on a base that's about 4 million total stores. So when you look at it that way, it's not as dire as the number 299,500 stores would be. The headline would be that. We're going to see that headline likely to go out there because it's sensational there. Now, how does that break out? 220,000 of those closures are going to be mom and pop stores. Those folks, they just cannot survive. Main Street just simply cannot survive when the competing factors of things come into play. Hindsight's 2020. We would have been much better adopting a process similar to Germany, where they guaranteed the payroll through the payroll systems and solutions that were offered, rather than trying to push the stuff through the banks and get it to people that way. 220,000 closing there. That's on a base of 2.1 million. So I'm going to show the percentages in the next slide. So you'll see that, but you'll see the closures that we're projecting are heavily dominated by the smaller guys. Fundamentally, what's going to happen is the Main Street retailer, your smaller retailers, and a lot in these other states are getting hit really hard. And that's why when you look at the COVID data and you look at this kind of data, you match those things together, and why people are scrambling. We've got to get open. We've got to get open. And that's the big part of things. So as we look at it moving forward there, what's the percentage of the particular size of chains here? So 9% of the one store companies, 10.6% of the 2 to 9% companies, 6.8% of those. These would be called what we call our SMB. And then up in here, this would be considered our enterprise. And I know most of the audience is focused on enterprise, so I want to give you one little piece of data here. When we look at the overall view of things, that we're seeing an increase in the food, drug, mass merchants, and convenience store. A lot of that is related to cannabis and CBD shops growing, is where a lot of that growth is, as well as dollar stores and things growing. When you look at the general merchandise retailer, the biggest cut, and those are your mall-based retailers, we're going to see a great deal of change there, unfortunately. And then we're looking at restaurants. Your chain restaurants, well, hospitality, this goes into hotels and everything else here, theme parks, etc. Your chain restaurants are likely going to do better than others there. So as we look at these numbers, understand not all states are equal. This breakout that we're going to show per state is determined by the size of the state, the lockdown period of things, the reopening plans through July 31st. And the way we reviewed the data is we looked through the months that would be fully closed, 25% open, 50% open, 75% open, or 100% open through July 31st. And we made the assumption, two assumptions. One, there wasn't going to be an outbreak in the fall. That is still in place, and that could happen, but it's not in our numbers here. And also the fact that everybody is essentially open at the same rate on July 31st. And I know that's not realistic, but we've got to make some assumptions where we could get some things there. These are closures. What I'm going to show you here is only focused on that GMS category and the restaurants, department stores, specialty stores, and restaurants there. So our estimate is close to $300 billion in the losses for the year in those sectors, but $241 billion due to the lockdown just over these next 4 months related to there. As I mentioned, not all states are equal. This was a post that came out yesterday about the availability of the loans, and you'll notice that the largest population states got the fewest number of percentage of loans there. This is the look at the data by state, in what we're talking about in terms of things. These 10 states represent 58% of all the store closings. And the California number could be significantly higher. So this is the percentage of total sales that are lost. This is the number of months out of the 4-month period that this state will be closed there when you adjust for 25%, 50%, 100%, et cetera. So we've got to project those. The California number would be closer, actually higher than the New York number, except it's mitigated quite a bit by the California plan from the governor that is basically using small restaurants as kind of a welcome, or what's the word? Oh, I forget. There's a really popular plan for seniors for meals. Anyway, they could order up to 3 meals a day through local restaurants, and that has mitigated a lot of the losses in the restaurant sector that is reduced there. So this gives you a view of what we project. 175 of the 299,000 stores are going to come from these 10 states because of the lockdown procedures and stuff there. So what does that mean in terms of our overall forecast? I'll let you go through those assumptions when you download the slides. It's gotten a little deeper than what it was because of the lockdown and the mess regarding the stimulus plans. And I'm just going to go here because this shows you the overall change that's occurred over these times. So we're now projecting a total loss of 6.9% in North America versus an original forecast of 2.0 gain. When this first came out, before the lockdowns were put into place, we were very low. Then the lockdowns came into place, but we had hope for PPP, 3.9. Then we saw the quagmire that became 6.2, and then by adjusting it by states, now we're now showing, because the most populous states for retail are the ones that are the heaviest hit, that it's going to go to 6.9. So this kind of explains all of the different things that are related there. So what is our one piece of hope that is out there right now? Unfortunately, it is fuel prices being low. We're estimating that we are going to get a stimulus plan for $500 to $540 billion by the end of the year. As long as fuel prices stay low, this assumes about 90 cents to $1 difference throughout the rest of the year here on the fuel prices. Almost all of that money typically goes into retail and hospitality over the years. So that is one big thing in our favor here. So what does recovery look like? Is it a V shape? Is it an L shape? Is it a U shape? Is it a Nike swoosh? It's more like a Nike swoosh. The Nike swoosh kind of goes backwards. We can't really do that backwards in time unless we're looking at Back to the Future here and have a DeLorean. But when we look at this, the overall recovery, we're projecting we will be back to, and this is all based on, and it's very important that I share this. This is based on when do we get back to 2019. If it's just based on growth, we're looking at a horrible Q1, Q2 this year. So 2021, Q1, Q2 may go positive. But when we look at what does it take us to get back to where we are today, or in 2019, we're projecting it's going to be around December of 2022 before the entire 13 segments are back to that level. Once again, the assumptions is we're going to have a therapeutic later this summer that is going to mitigate the chances of death and severe hospitalization there, and that within a year or so we're going to have a vaccine for this, and that's going to allow things to go forward. But not all segments are equal. Food, drug, convenience, and mass merchants, we had this huge spike in March. I mean, just ginormous spike. And now it's dropped considerably. It's still up. However, social distancing rules and limiting the number of people to go in the stores are limiting that growth, and supply chain issues related to, getting the things that everybody wants, toilet paper and meat and hygiene products, etc. So that is our look at that one. When we look at the department stores, specialty hard goods, specialty soft goods, we do not see this getting back to the 2023 level until 2019 level until 2023 at best. There's a lot of these stores that are going to go under. In the larger things, we're going to have brands that survive, but stores and chains that don't there. And that's going to take a long time to unwind. And we're hopeful that we can get back to 2019 levels by January of 2023. Restaurants, now this doesn't include the hotels and the hospitalities and the extension here. So this is table service, quick service, fast food, restaurants here. Huge dip now, depending on the lockdowns. This is a big challenge because if you can only be open at 25% or 50%, that's going to drag for a while. The demand will be there, I believe. The ability to open and the supply to be open and the profitability of those restaurants are going to be lagging. But we're still thinking that we're going to get back to zero because that demand for eating out is so strong that by the end of 2022, that we're going to be back to the levels that we were in 2019 in this space. Once again, assuming we've got this therapeutic and assuming that we have a vaccine that'll be used there. So what does it look like when you put them all together? It looks like this. This gets on the same scale here. So once again, we do not have the hotels and the theme parks, et cetera, in this, but we've got it, going forward, and shows kind of where we see the overall market getting over the next 3 years. Now, this could all change. This is based on our best knowledge right now on May 7th of where things are for North America. We've adjusted some of the numbers internationally as well. I'm going to leave those here for you to look at in the slides and go through there. The actual recovery is going to be determined by the following in your individual states: the length of the lockdown in that state, the benefits that retailers offer and restaurants offer their employees. If somebody has health insurance, they're far more likely to come back to work. The relationship with their employees, if they've got a good relationship, those folks are far more likely to come back to work. The generosity of your state's unemployment, that can be an adverse issue here. In the state of Washington, I believe you can make up to $30 an hour there, and Massachusetts, $30 an hour by being unemployed there, with the new $600 that's been added by the federal government. That's really tough. Related to that, the ineptness of your unemployment office. If you've got an unemployment office that has been able to get the federal money to the employees that have been unemployed, those people are far more likely not to come back to work than those where that money has not shown up yet. And it's just a promise that's out there for people. As well, could people even get into their unemployment systems related to that? So that's that one. So, some of the things that'll last, this is more of a setup to change gears and move into the area of frictionless there that our sponsors want us to get to. Things that are going to last when we get through this. We're going to talk a lot about this in future webinars, but the increased use of mobile technology, mobile for payment, mobile for pickup, delivery. You look at restaurants now, Chick-fil-A now has 4 drive-throughs in some locations. Texas Roadhouse using voice and mobile devices all over the place there. So we're going to see an increased use of voice in a lot of different locations there. You're welcome, Verlin. There, the increased delivery, how much of that sticks there? The experience has not been that well. We're going to see an accelerated move away from cash to more mobile payments and contactless payment options there. And we're going to have a lot of changing store formats, which leads us into this whole concept of the golden age of frictionless retail. So this is a study, a research white paper that's available for free on our website. It's available right now for download. You would go to ihlservices.com, the research and advisory tab, then white papers, and it'll be right there. And you can download any of these white papers that are there for that. And so changing gears, it's so hard to shift gears like this when you've been going all this economic data to potential future and some of the things there. We all know the shopping process. You know, we research our products online. Then we go to an interactive or interaction with the site itself. We check on inventory visibility. We choose our products that are there, and then we either do that digitally or physically. We add it to our cart, and then we complete the transaction. When we look at the overall process regarding frictionless, most of it has been around the concept of just removing the line. And so there's lots of definition of friction and removing friction. And I think there's opportunities to remove friction at any one of these points of the process. But generally, people think of Amazon Go concept and they think of removing the checkout line by going through there. But there are pieces along the way. And some of those pieces are the issue related to mobile payments. And this is data actually pre-COVID-19. You know, the fast food restaurants had invested in the mobile payment at a rate 2 times higher than other retail segments. I think you're seeing a lot of those other retail segments catch up now and dominate that because of COVID. But 50% of the fast food chains that were surveyed in our study in January said they plan to have mobile payment as an option by the end of 2020. My guess is that is likely now 75% to 100 because of the rush of COVID-19 there. Excuse me. Once again, fast food is leading on the mobile payment side of things when you overall. So 90% can do the e-commerce of the apps can do mobile payment today, and then mobile e-commerce, 87% of those can now do that with the actual solutions. When we think of frictionless in the perspective of the concept of the Amazon Go format, which is just walk in, walk out side of things, it's becoming more and more appealing as a result of COVID. There's no question about it. The whole touchless, no employees to be infected, social distancing, placing these things through there. But the move was already in place. And I like to say when it comes to COVID, what COVID did has taken trends that were always in place and moving in place and putting rocket fuel into those trends and launching those trends. So pre-COVID-19, 33% of the stores were offering frictionless payment options. And so that was already in play there. The challenge with frictionless has always been the size. It's always been a convenience store size format because of the cost per square foot related to that and the concerns of loss prevention. So you've got, Amazon Go formats. This is an Albert Heijn comment thing. Here's an Asian version of there's actually far more frictionless stores in China and South Korea than there are anywhere in the United States. JD.com has more frictionless stores themselves than we have in the entire US today, but that's changing rapidly. So when it comes to frictionless and you want to look at the things that are driving change in behavior and advancements related to retail, look to China and look to South Korea. In a lot of ways, they're far more advanced when it comes to these technologies that are in place. But the formats, generally range from 800 to a maximum of 3,000 square feet. And the reason for that is primarily due to the cost related. Sorry about that. Something just popped. The cost per square foot. These are heavy technical installs. When we originally looked at it related to that, the typical Amazon Go size store that we originally looked at was over $1 million in technology required to pull that store off. And fortunately, those costs are dramatically decreasing. I think COVID-19 will further decrease those costs because you're going to have supply and demand, but because of the delay we've kind of been in as well, Moore's law has more time to come into effect regarding a lot of those different cameras and the edge processing and things like that. So the costs are dropping considerably. So the store size that can be applied to is much greater. So when you have the trends that have come from COVID-19, you have the lower cost, you have the desire for things. If you could reduce the risk from a pandemic to your employees in doing that, I think there's just this general move to a lot more frictionless retailing going forward at a much higher rate than we were projecting before the pandemic. Core enabling technologies, and there's more of these technologies, but generally they come around these 4 areas. Computer vision, that is inherent in almost any successful frictionless retail environment today, or autonomous retail environment today, because the ability to identify the items there and what they are by visual, not people messing around with tags or things like that, is a big deal. Great advancements that are happening in computer vision. There's also the move now that some of the inventory tracking solutions are now adding LiDAR to their system so that they can see past the item that's first on the shelf to get a true accurate count of inventory there. So very, very critical for that piece. Obviously, that is driven heavily by AI and machine learning. Those algorithms are improving quite a bit as well, and the cost of those are coming down dramatically. Some concepts add smart shelves to that, and those smart shelves have a weight component to it, or a physical spacing requirement related to it that adds to the computer vision side of it to understand, what product was taken, how many of those products were taken, et cetera. Those can be combined. And then RFID. RFID works great in a frictionless environment. It doesn't work as great with liquids. So we fully expect, as frictionless moves to more things like clothing and electronics and things like that, RFID is a superior technology in those environments. It's not as good because of the cost of the tags for liquids and high density metals there, because the cost of the tag, you can still do it, but the cost of the tag is considerably higher there. And so those are the core technologies depending on the segment that's in place. And then there's one more big one that we'll discuss here later. But the people that are moving to frictionless are deploying RFID in their environments at much higher rates than average, 96% higher rate of using RFID. Once again, it's rarely the only technology that's deployed in a frictionless environment, but it is one that adds a triangulation effect by a separate technology that dramatically lowers the loss prevention cost and improves the accuracy of reading the items and getting the right items when somebody walks out the store. The people as well, the people that are doing frictionless and that are racing into frictionless are not doing it by the factor of just saying, waking up one day and saying, oh, I got to do frictionless. It doesn't work that way. There's a lot of time and energy that's required to understanding each of those technologies by themselves before you combine them into a solution like frictionless. So that's why it's no surprise to us that retailers that are planning a frictionless future, they've already been deploying computer vision at a rate 225% of those of other retailers. That's no surprise. The same is true when you get to some of these other key technologies that are enabling, and I can't emphasize enough the importance of the edge computing piece of things here. The amount of data that is put together through RFID or computer vision in particular, it overwhelms the networks. If you're doing video or images, et cetera, the closer you are to the end device for that processing, the more important it was. So we've been in this trend where things have pushed to the cloud, and looking at the WAN network, et cetera, there. But things have, when it comes to frictionless, it's about moving more of that processing back to the store, leveraging edge computing, optimizing that traffic through SD-WAN for what goes upstream. And then we're seeing with video analytics a lot higher. So these guys already who are planning frictionless are already deploying these technologies at much higher rates in other aspects before they combine these things together there. So when you compare this to other technologies and where we are, we're still really in an infancy stage when it comes to frictionless. It took 25 years for people to get comfortable with self-checkout. There are some people that still aren't comfortable with that. We're seeing accelerated use of mobile now that's going to help frictionless here. But you know, frictionless, we're going to get into this age of moving forward, but you're going to have to be very targeted in where you put your frictionless stores so that your consumer base there can take advantage of that and really understands it and will accept it. You don't want to put it in the middle of Iowa at a grocery store there. That's where you want to introduce frictionless, because you still have a consideration and a high level of check usage for transactions in that store there. However, towards a college campus, inner city, high office employee area, those are places where you could have frictionless and leverage frictionless. Now, before we end, it's important that we talk about what's holding things back. And the biggest thing that holds things back from frictionless, once again, that we have the cost of the technology, but it's also the risk of losses. Retailers lose between 1.5% to 2% of sales per year there. And when the loss prevention systems or things, or we don't go after shoplifters decisions come into play, that can have devastating impacts on what happens to your store. There are some retailers that have removed their loss prevention systems in favor of faster checkout and less interaction because their policy is not to challenge shoplifters. Those folks have seen their losses increase to 3.5% of sales annually as a result. The organized crime guys in particular have targeted those particular stores. So when you think of frictionless, you know, one of the things that holds it back is the security, and that's where those multiple of technologies come into play. And can it be cost effective there? I think we're adding now the cost effectiveness aspect of it is not just employees versus technologies, it's safety of employees versus safety of customers versus technology. So the lawyer aspect of it in the midst of a pandemic kind of comes into it, and that helps the overall concept of frictionless there. And as we mentioned earlier, having success with a particular technology or getting customers, particularly when it comes to frictionless, where the customer completely checks out with by themselves there, we found that retailers that are most likely to do frictionless have a 158% higher likelihood of having done self-checkout in their chains already. So we're looking at more, when we look at frictionless, it's driving more towards the convenience, but also towards the traditional grocery sectors and smaller format stores, but also where you'd have larger convenience store formats, as well as where you'd see DIY and some of the other formats where we've had self-checkout. So that's it for the general slides. We're going to go over to Q&A, and I'm going to take a break and turn it over to Lee to start going through those questions and answers, and invite Jerry and Lee, if you guys want to turn your cameras on and come back in, if you can do that.
You sure you want that?
I don't know. Jerry, did you take a shower today?
Yeah, I did take a shower, yes. And I even put on a clean shirt for this.
Hair's down. All right. That's good to see. I'll move you guys back.
Real quick, a couple people asked once again about the slides. Yes, they will be available, and we will be getting those out to you later in the day. Let's see. Mark Heller asked, the data you're quoting, is this based on our research, IHL's research?
Which I guess I would need to know.
I
Which
think
data, Mark?
a lot of the you could talk about. I mean, the store data. That's most of that's
ours.
in our SMB reports and so forth. I guess for some of the other things that Jerry ran through, I'll let him to talk to that.
Really kind of all the, I mean, the frictionless data that Greg ran through, that's all our data, that's all our analysis. The store count impact, we base that on US and Canada's census numbers. Then we go in and we went by chain size, by vertical, and then we made internal estimates, again, based upon things we've read, other surveys, our own knowledge, folks that we've collected information from to make estimates of what we thought store impacts were going to be. I mean, you go look at even the department store numbers that we quoted, you start to hear about the number of companies that are already filing for bankruptcy. And again, those things tend to show that we're on track. I mean, you go look at some of the estimates made out of the National Restaurant Association, and I think those are kind of in line with some of the numbers and the projections that we're making. So a combination of our numbers and other people's numbers that we've rolled into to make those estimates. So
when
again,
it comes to the COVID numbers, you know, all the stuff up front that I shared with you, the sources are on each one of those slides. The general source is Johns Hopkins data when it comes to each of the states when we get to the pieces related to that. And then on that slide that I worked all that is, I'll put it in there if I didn't put it in there already, a link to a document that I keep track of on a daily basis, that I update the cases for my own benefit so that I can see what the real data is.
I think it's also important. I mean, when Greg showed that 300,000 number, that is a rather shocking number. And before we all go and it drives us into a state of depression, I think it's important to know that about, I think 64% of those closures are isolated to hospitality. And a lot of that's going to come back. I mean, I know Greg mentioned people haven't stopped. People still want to eat out. They just feel inhibited to eat out from a safety standpoint. So, you know, you go look at a lot of the entertainment, a lot of the lodging, you know, you may have.
Uh-oh, we lost Jerry. So Jerry's going to talk, and you're going to hear my voice. So, Jerry, we lost your audio. One important thing to say is we're talking 254,000 of the 290,000 retailers that are going to go under this year are small and medium businesses. Those will come back, and I didn't get a chance to share it in the live portion there, or the presentation portion, but Scott Galloway came up with a statement the other day that I fully agree with, and he said there's never been a worse time to be a small business than right now for the next 6 months in the last 10, 12 years. There will never be a better time for you to start a small business than in about 6 months' time, our time. The best time to start a small business in the middle of a recession. And that's how you get moving and get growing there. So these small businesses are going to come back. They're going to come back. They're just different owners. It's devastating to the people that are in business today. If businesses can simply survive through this, they are going to come out of this much stronger going forward because of the purge of the weakest of the businesses there, because the demand for a lot of those things are going to be in place. When it comes to the general merchandise segments there, the clothing segments, we've needed to purge a lot of those stores because of the square footage that we have. But the demand on the restaurant side is going to be there. It's definitely going to be there.
Absolutely.
Question from Julia Cook. Can you speak just a little bit more about the adoption of frictionless across some of the highlight categories, food, fashion, that kind of thing.
Jerry, you want to do that? Do you got voice
Well,
back?
I mean, right now when we go look, assuming everybody can hear me, right now, I mean, you go look at most of the examples in North America, most of the examples internationally. You've seen it in convenience and small format food. That's kind of where it makes the most sense right now, because you have a couple of limitations. One, your sensor equipment, the height of ceilings and having to drop down cameras, and just the cost on a per square footage standpoint. I know I've heard stories around Walmart and some of the things that they're trying in their development environments for more of your mass merchant, large format stores. And I think the big thing, if you recall back to the chart that Greg showed, well, one, he mentioned RFID, and I think RFID is going to be a tremendous help in the more of the hard goods, soft goods type sector, driving it in. But again, you're going to have the whole economies of scale that once we develop more momentum around this subject, you're going to have the prices are going to come down. You're going to have improvements in camera vision technology. I mean, you guys may or may not know this, but actually Amazon, because they weren't happy with the existing technology in the marketplace, they developed all the image recognition. That's a custom-made camera that Amazon has procured and they have manufactured just for the Amazon Go store. So as we go look at the camera technology, image processing capability, the fidelity on these algorithms, they improve by 100% every couple of years. So we really think you're going to get a pop in the next couple of years, because not only is this array of cameras, not only is it great for checkout, but again, out of stocks, checking freshness, all the signaling that you can do, understanding customer behavior. There's so much more than just checkout that you can do with this array of cameras and the technology that's behind it. So
I would add, I think one of the first things that you're going to see, Julia, for the cross beyond the C-store type of environment where you're going to see frictionless is in airports across categories, whether it's the electronics piece there, whether it's clothing, those sort of things in the airports and airport retailing, because you've already got that security at the outer bounds, and then you're going to have the phone that's going to identify the customer when you come in. You can triangulate that stuff, and plus where that person is going, because you can tap into, if something's wrong, you can tap into where that person is going if something's wrong. I think that's going to allay itself to going into fashion and some of these other categories in a smaller store format much faster than, say, your general mall.
Yeah.
I think also one of the things that's also going to cause it to pop is that I think just as there's this concern of getting too intimate with AWS, and so there's this hesitancy to use AWS and more interest in potentially Microsoft Azure and Google kind of going forward. I think we're going to potentially, even though Amazon, they're licensing their technology, I think in some of the competing offerings, we're going to see much more interest and activity. And I think ultimately what you're going to have is our traditional POS hardware and software vendors start to acquire some of these startups when they get to a certain place of maturization. And then I think the dam is going to burst at that point. You're going to have a lot of these key players that compete with Go technology that get purchased, and then that's going to foster a wave of adoption at a much greater pace than we're at right now. So the old saying, it's a coming.
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Here's a question from Kenneth Bundy, and I'll take this on for just a moment. How will retailers seek to change their supply chain? And I think the initial obvious answer is, well, we probably got to look domestically a heck of a lot more than we have to this point. The interruption in shipments and so forth from the Far East has had an impact already. And maybe there's some other things we need to do in terms of, especially meat packing plants and things like that. There's probably some technologies that need to be applied there that can improve the situation here in the States a heck of a lot more than they currently sit. How about you guys?
We're gonna That's a great lead in into our next webinar that's coming up, where we're going to get into that a much greater detail. Next Wednesday, we're going to do another webinar with Ceridian, looking at the restart and how you restart, and what are some of those technologies that are going to be deployed. What are the employee impacts related to doing that? How do you protect your employees? How do you choose who comes back and when? How do you deal with a person that doesn't want to come back? The implications of training costs, if you have to retrain people because they want to stay on unemployment. That's all next week.
Okay, and I don't have the name for this one, but what's your sense of retailers' willingness to make the necessary IT investments during the slow sales period they're about to enter?
It's going to be like any other time, to be honest with you. The availability of cheap money is very enticing. There are going to be a subset of people that look at this as an opportunity to transform, to cut the barriers that have been placed to not transform. That, in fact, I think a lot of companies are going to say, who's been holding us back? This is our excuse to get rid of those people and transform to who we want to be from a technology standpoint. Because there's such cheap money out there, I think that's going to help. The downside is if you need that cheap money to simply survive from an operational standpoint, that's going to be much more challenging in that aspect. So I would think that in the DIY space, the electronic space, maybe furniture, on the hard goods, then your mass merchants, certainly your mass merchants and in food, drug, convenience areas, those are going to be the huge markets for technology improvements.
And I found that question actually came from Ricardo. So
okay.
Let's see. How about this? This is from Sivaram. Sivaram's actually had a couple other questions that you've actually answered in the process of answering other things. He asks, how should retailers prepare to compete with e-commerce / JCPenney? Some retailers going bankrupt. What should they do to avoid closures, mergers, etc.?
It really depends on the individual retailer. I'm not sure I can give a blanket answer. I think there are certain brands that we all grew up with that are not going to be around as retail stores, but they're going to be around as brands. Some will go bankrupt and reemerge with smaller store sizes, store formats, store sizes, etc. Number of stores. Others won't make it and will be completely liquidated and shut down. It really comes down to the strength of the brand. The smaller retailers don't have that option, and that's why things are weighted so much more heavily to those small retailers.
Kathleen Murphy asks, a lot of our retailers are asking for a playbook on how to get started with Frictionless. Do you have any research or plans for this?
Yeah, I think we go into a little bit in the white paper. It kind of walks that out. I think the main thing that I didn't mention is you don't have to do this alone. There are partners who have great opportunities and great tool sets that can help you do each individual things. Some people have, frictionless in a box, so to speak, that is available for that. So I would look to say that the biggest inhibitor of all that is getting to the data scientists around the AI and machine learning. Those are the most costly people that you need as part of this process, and the least available. And you're probably going to have to partner to get those people, unless you're the Walmarts and the Googles of the world. Walmart hired, I believe, last year more data scientists than Google did, which is pretty amazing.
This is from Frederick Callaghan. And I think you touched on this, but it's probably good to revisit. Are you making any assumptions about a fall / winter resurgence?
No, and right now, we are not, the numbers that we are showing does not factor that in. It is my firm belief that all of the scientists focused on things like we've already seen with remdesivir being one drug that's affecting the therapeutic side, that by the end of summer, and hopefully before football season,
College football season,
have a therapeutic that is going to be mitigating the effects of COVID by then. With all these scientists and all these things being in places. I mean, that, that's another funny thing of this. Stanford came out with a study based on antibodies. They found that in Santa Clara County, 85 times more people actually had COVID than is being reported based on the antibodies. So what does NBC News do? He goes and they get, oh, well, who's the competitor to Stanford? Who hates Stanford? Oh, let's get a scientist from Cal Berkeley to comment on the data. It'd be like the Ohio State coming out with something. Let's get Michigan to comment on those are some of the games that are out there that you got to kind of fight your way through to get it. But the answer to the question, no, it is not factored into this data. If we have that, I don't even want to surmise the impact that will have, because it's now hitting at Christmas time for retailers. And these numbers would probably triple or quadruple if we have a situation like that in the fall.
Question here, will frictionless / contactless become the primary experience or an additional option to be offered in addition to the traditional cash wrap?
No. I don't think frictionless is going to get to that level. I don't see this replacing, point of sale systems or, getting out of place. I think people don't like lines. That is definitely true. But I think the rub between the technology being able to scale to large enough stores to where you can get a large enough variety of items to purchase there, I think you're far more likely to have a shop by your own app type of thing as you go through the store, where you scan and go, scan and go, scan and go, and then you're checked like you would be at Sam's, is going to be a far more likely scenario than, you just walk in and walk out with no human intervention.
People always projected and thought, and we would get leading questions from publications about self-checkout cannibalizing both employment and traditional checkout, and that really never occurred. It's almost entirely been complementary that we've seen self-checkout.
Yeah.
Question here from Renjara. He says, does the data take into consideration that the hospitality players or restaurateurs might try new means to innovate and grow their businesses?
Yes. When you're faced with survival, you get real creative. And that's why I kind of laugh when I talk to people. Truth is stranger than fiction. If at NRF show we would have told you that the most effective restaurant promotion this year would be giving away a roll of toilet paper with every $20 meal, and it would be absolutely perfectly normal for people to walk into banks and to liquor stores with masks on, and nobody would think twice. Within 2 months, you would have locked us up. And so things have changed so much that people have sat there and say, how do I survive? And it brings out the best in creativity of folks that are really hungry to survive.
Here's a question on retail real estate. How are retail landlords impacted by these closures?
It's ugly. Reach out to Jerry. Jerry, I don't know, are you able to share that report that you showed me?
I don't think we have the license to share that, but we came across some good data which talked about the specific retailers and the percentage of those retailers that are not paying the rent. in March and April, and it was eye-opening, shocking, and absolutely just ugly, ugly, ugly to look at.
I just want to take a chance to praise retailers, some retailers in particular, particularly TJX, Ross, Marshalls. Those guys are heads above every other retailer that has been forced to close in terms of their paying their rents. That I've seen the data that's been shown to me there.
I would also add here in Florida, Publix, for every property that they own, I think for both March and April, they are covering the rent of anybody that is leasing out a space in one of their plazas. I mean, that's a really solid gesture. And I think they may own over somewhere between 500 and 800 locations strip centers where their stores are located, where they're the landlord. So that's just a tremendous shot in the arm for some small retailers.
Yeah, but it's going to be rough, particularly the mall-based stores. It's not going to be as bad for the off-mall locations, but the mall-based stores, it's really rough there. One of the benefits of opening, at least whether it's by appointments or anything else, is the fact that you can actually get your inventory out of your stores to ship it now for e-commerce that you haven't been able to do if you were in fast fashion, where all that inventory was at the store level, but you couldn't get to the store and you couldn't lock down, and FedEx and UPS weren't going to pick up there. You can actually get to that now. So that's a big benefit for a lot of those retailers.
Yeah, and I guess on the heels of this was Paul Wolf actually that asked this question. We did that work for the folks out in the Midwest state, Greg, and one of the things that we had determined was that the traditional way of doing business for retail landlords has got to change, because they can't just sign a contract and then sit back and expect to collect percentage rents for
it's another one of those trends that was already happening that now gets rocket fuel because of COVID. Yeah,
big time
residential, office space, medical space, anything to drive traffic.
Let's see, I think we've pretty much covered most of the ones that we've got here. We're at 10 after, Greg.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's wrap it up. Well, thanks everybody. Stay safe and healthy out there. Thanks for joining. Thanks for staying on. 133 of you still hanging in here at an hour after. Thanks for the attendance that stayed throughout. Really appreciate that, and look forward to seeing you guys soon. Take care.
Stay safe, guys.